This is New Wild Review. This is the last podcast probably of 2022. So if you're trying to collect the whole set, you'll definitely want to get this one because today we're going to be speaking with one of my personal heroes in this world and the awesome, primarily, I think of her as a swallow rehabilitator, but she's a songbird rehabilitator working in the in Sonoma County. Is that where
Mhm.
you're at, Veronica? And her name is Veronica Bowers. And I'm just going to briefly let you know, I met Veronica in 2007 when we were both about 13, something like that. Yeah. Um, and it was at the Costco Busan oil spill, which was, for those of you who don't know what that means, the vessel Costco Busan, a container ship, crashed into the Bay Bridge in San Francisco Bay and spilled some tens of thousands of its bunker fuel into the bay in November, just as migratory waterfowl had returned for their wintering grounds of San Francisco Bay, and so it was a fairly horrible disaster for waterfowl in San Francisco that winter. And Veronica came to help wash birds, and we worked together for a few weeks, and we went through about, I guess it was about 1,100 birds in 8 days, or 800 birds in 11 days. I'm foggy on the numbers at this point, but it was a lot of birds, and Veronica was there every day washing birds, and is at the time I learned was a songbird expert who was also International Bird Rescue's essential, uh, you know, songbird would be the songbird oiled songbird response person. And over time, we've been together on many projects. Well, like especially through like CCWR when we served on the board together. And we're going to talk some about wildlife care today, and also some advocacy stuff because Veronica is a leader in both things. And and without any further ado, I'm just going to introduce Veronica Bowers, who you've been looking at all the whole time because this is a video podcast. Hey, Veronica, welcome to
Hi,
New Wild Review.
Monty. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And you are my personal hero. So it's a real honor to be here chatting with you on your podcast. Thank you
Oh,
for inviting me.
yeah, well, it's something we've been talking about doing this for a while now, and I really wanted to I really wanted to come do it in person at your facility so that we could just like we could all look at your beautiful songbird aviaries and stuff like that, and so that's been, and unfortunately the pandemic put a it's just such a crimp in everybody's plans all over the world. I hate to complain about it since I didn't lose anybody to it and or even get the virus so far. So I hate to complain when it's been so devastating to the world at large. And
Yeah. Well, whenever you're in this neck of the woods, I'd love to have you guys stop by for a visit
mm,
and we can look at birds.
yeah, that'd be great. So, one of the things that I really came to appreciate about you was the quality of your, besides for the care that you provide, which beside other than in that oil spill, we've never worked side by side on doing rehab, wildlife rehabilitation, that is, for those of you who loathe shorthand.
Thank
Um,
you.
that, um, Veronica Bowers, ladies and gentlemen. Um, so we will, anyway, uh, what the first one of your, other than washing birds and your dedication and your commitment and your attention to detail and your stamina, one of the first things I came to really admire about you was the quality of your presentations, because through CCWR, California Council for Wildlife Rehabilitators, and National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, I'd go to conferences and see your presentations on providing care to swallows and especially insectivores, and your um, championing the insect diet for raising songbird babies. I grew up as an apprentice where we made slurries for songbirds out of
Mhm.
assorted
Same here.
ick, you know.
Yeah.
And well, okay, you want to talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit?
I would like, you know how much I love talking about that.
I do.
We're gonna be, we may regret this in about an hour and a half, but
Mm,
I know you can edit it all out.
mhm.
Yeah, I cut my teeth, so to speak, on slurries as well. So 20 something years ago, the facility that I started volunteering at was using a concoction of sorts, with no scientific basis other than one of the primary ingredients was a hand rearing formula for domestic birds. And then they added a bunch of other crap in there. And I think it was probably the first 2 years that I was with that facility, just kind of getting to know this whole process of wildlife rehabilitation. And they were an all bird facility. Obviously, the majority of their patients consisted of songbirds. And every summer, there's just mass die off of the baby birds for a whole lot of reasons. But as I came to learn, the nutrition they were offering had a lot to do with it. Birds were always filthy. They were always small and just kind of poorly developed looking. And the ones that did survive seemed like they were in care forever. And somewhere after my second season, I saw I think it was a newsletter maybe, or one of the journals at the intake desk of this particular facility from the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. And it was all about this conference that they were going to be having in the spring. So I had no idea that such a thing even existed, that there was actually an association for wildlife rehabilitators. And there was all this great content listed, and it had it broken out by groups of animals that wildlife rehabilitators would probably be specializing in. And there were veterinary topics. And I mean, my brain exploded. I just thought, I think there might be a lot of answers here that I have big questions about. And I remember there was a topic called, it was something about avian nutrition. And the woman's name, the presenter's name was Janine Perlman. And she was going to be talking about a diet called the MAC diet. So I talked to the director of animal care at the facility and I said, I saw this information. I'm really interested in going to this symposium. And she said, oh, great, I'm going too. So we went together and I learned about the MAC diet and I learned about what a growing passerine needs to develop properly. And Janine's whole mantra was, a science-based, peer-reviewed mantra, was that these little critters out in the wild are fed insects by their parents. And therefore, when they are in our care, we should strive to emulate as natural of a diet as possible for them, because this is what their bodies have evolved to assimilate those nutrients and foster healthy growth and development, both of their physical body, but of their behavioral body as
Uh-huh.
well. So if they're not physically well developed, they're also behaviorally not going to be well developed. And got back from the symposium full of all kinds of ideas and really continuing to think about this whole idea of the MAC diet and how its protein profile was the highest that you could possibly achieve in any formulated diet. And she also advocated strongly for feeding live insects in tandem with this diet. That if you wanted to achieve maximum nutrition, so this was over 20 years ago, mind
Mhm.
you, I'm starting to sound really old, I realize. But anyway, so feeding live insects as well as the formula was going to help you achieve optimal growth optimal results in development for these young growing passerines who grow faster than any other organism that we're going to have in care in a wildlife facility. They go from egg to adult size practically in about 3 weeks. That takes some hardcore nutrition.
Uh-huh.
And why at that point she wasn't ready to just say, hey, get rid of the formula crap and go insects all the way was simply because she hadn't figured out how to formulate the nutrients, the vitamins, and the minerals in some form to give with the insects. So that was a few years later to come from Janine. But I went back and I proposed to the facility that I was working with at the time that we switched to this diet. And they tried it. Around that time, I was also starting to do home care for them. So I was working less in the facility and more with certain species at home. They found it very complicated to execute in the hospital. I had no problem utilizing it in my home-based home care operation. But the results were startling that first season of using it and seeing that, in fact, not only were birds beginning to survive past nestling stage, but they were actually thriving into fledgling, and the survival rate in care was increasing. Still had a problem with dirty, messy looking birds because they had a bunch of volunteers who were unskilled in hand feeding them this goop. But overall, you could see, hey, we're onto something there. And so I kept in close contact with Janine after that first year. I wanted to learn more about how we can do better for these songbirds while they're in our care, because in my mind, what I felt the biggest challenge was for this facility that was taking in for songbirds, that they struggled the most during the baby bird season when they had the highest volume of birds in care. And one of the biggest problems was raising these nestlings and getting them to fledgling stage and ensuring that they had proper nutrition. So that was the first hurdle that I wanted to see this facility at that time overcome. And then as I progressed in my work, my lifelong goal is to see every wildlife facility that cares for songbirds achieve optimal nutrition for their babies, plus a whole bunch of other stuff that I know we're going to talk about. But it was that one experience 22, 23 years ago now that I went, aha, of course, we should strive to feed them a diet that is close to their natural diet as possible. Why on earth would we be trying to feed them anything else?
I had a similar moment with seabirds. It came late because I started off at a facility that just fed fish or fish slurry for seabirds. And then I went to a facility that was more, their protocols were built around mass events. And so they were going for the most streamlined, easy, effective, and based on things like waterproofing more than nutrition, because they were going to be in care for a very short period of time, but there was going to be a lot of birds in one pool at one time, and fish in a pool can be complicated because of oils and waterproofing. So their solution was to feed a grain-based slurry. And it caused things like, especially in species that swallow their own feathers, feather ball impactions in their GI, which were deadly. And the solution to that was to feed them a papaya enzyme as well. And it's a little bit like the cat swallowed the fly who but it was a solution, and it worked. And in a limited time and care situation, that's also catastrophic, and you're trying, you know, I'm not criticizing the decision to do it that way, because
Yeah.
given the parameters of, you know, working with suddenly having 800 birds in care or something like that, that it may have, you know, it worked, it got the job done, but in a day-to-day rehab setting, that stuff was basically killing birds.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you know, and I had to sneak fish slurry. I knew how to make fish slurry from my past experience, and I had to sneak fish slurry in. Um, even, you know, but like that moment of just like, why in the world would you put a grain in the belly of a piscivore?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
you know, I mean, obviously we can. I mean, there's very smart people who are like, you know, you can have genetically modified food, and people can be fed nutrition pills, and they
Hmm.
will get the same vitamins that they need, you know, and it's like the skeptics versus the organic food, you know, and you can read these debates online if you actually want it. I'm not going to provide any links to anybody out there in TV land, but you can go on the internet and see people argue about things like that in the GMO human food debates.
Sure.
But here in wildlife rehab, it makes sense to not improve on nature.
Exactly. I think that's when I think about my own work, I think I have always strived to, you know, keep their care as natural as possible, keep their care as consistent with their natural wildlife as possible.
Mhm.
Because in my mind, that's that runs parallel with the idea of doing no harm. And there are other choices beyond nutrition that can be made on behalf of our patients while in our care that we may not know the degree of harm it causes. So, if you try to stick to what you do know about their natural history and you do know about their needs, then you can feel fairly reassured that you are doing the very best you can for them.
I had a wildlife rehabilitator. This was when I was just a little puppy, and she, I was setting up a reptarium, a type of housing that Veronica and I are quite familiar with, which is basically, it's awesome because it doesn't mess up bird feathers. It's a
Yes.
soft-sided place. It's for, they call it reptariums. They don't make them anymore. It's very sad, sad, sad. But in any case, I was setting up a reptarium for, at the time, named a rufous-sided towhee, now known as the spotted towhee. And the rehabilitator who was giving me instructions on doing it said, and remember, he's a towhee. And I was like, huh? And she just made this little scritch, 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 right, with her feet.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh. And so I scattered a bunch of leaves and like forest litter on the floor
Yeah.
of the thing. And it was astonishing, right? Just like we put this bird in there, totally stressed, totally freaked about being in our hands in our captive situation. And when we put him into the housing that was set up, he immediately went about acting more normal. Like, was he still stressed? Of course he was. Was he still, you know, terrified? Of course he was. But he also had some leaves to kick around.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it, you
I
know, and
think
you could see, I mean, I don't know if you could see it. I felt like I could feel his stress level diminish. And it's not like we even were being that great about putting like mealworms in the leaves. He just had leaves to kick around.
mhm. Yeah.
We had a one more thing about that, a different example. Laura and I were in Michigan on an oil spill, and actually this took place in Illinois. I'm sorry. There was a spill within the spill. During the
Well,
Michigan spill, we got diverted over to Chicagoland for another tar sand spill that had happened there.
mhm.
Pipelines breaking, basically. Um, and this one hit a pond that was full of snapping turtles, like 35-pound snapping turtles.
Oh my word.
They were huge. Um,
Wow.
Interestingly enough, they're not that hard to handle. If you've handled an eagle, you can handle a snapping turtle.
Oh my gosh. I didn't
Um,
know they could get that big. That's
I,
amazing.
it means they're pretty old if they're that big. I, I gathered from watching them and working with them that snapping turtles are functionally immortal. It was I watched a guy roll down. It was a dirt. It was a semi dump truck of polluted soil being dumped to be shipped off to Indiana at some point because
Oh,
that's what cleanup is you move your pile
yeah,
of dirt from here to there.
yeah.
And and as they were dumping this soil, I just happened to be there and I looked up and here comes rolling down the pile a gigantic snapping turtle. In fact, the very guy who I'm talking about, when the day I got him, he rolled down a pile of dirt, and when ground, he hit the ground, all four legs out, ready to kill.
Oh my
He was,
gosh.
and I was just like, what a guy, you know? I mean, he was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever been in, but I'm ready to take on all comers. And
It only depends.
but when we got him into, I had him in a 6 foot diameter metal stock tank. Aquatic turtle. He needed to be in water, but all day long he's just like making this horrible noise on the metal bottom, just
Oh,
scratching, grinding on it.
yeah.
And I had just acquired this marvelous book. Oh, I think I could probably pull it out, maybe. Oh, uh, Turtles of the United States and Canada. Turtles of the United States and Canada. Magnificent book. I don't know if I can actually reach it. If I could, I would, and I'd pull it out and I'd be like, "You guys should look at this book. You should own it yourselves. It only costs like $300."
Oh, okay. Every reference library is complete with one of those.
Yes, and but anyway, I was reading the natural history of snapping turtles. Not something I was born knowing, and turns out the snapping turtle's method of hunting is to burrow into the river bottom and wait for something tasty to swim by.
Ah, interesting.
And so I went and got a bunch of pea gravel and lined the bottom of the tank with about 6 inches of pea gravel. And he stopped trying to dig through the bottom of the tank and just settled into it.
Yeah.
And it
Oh,
was like, ah, yeah, exactly. It
yes.
was The relief was palpable for everyone, you know.
Aw.
So how
Yeah,
do you
even me. I just lived that whole experience. As soon as you said he was scratching on the side of the tank, it just my chest tightened. I was so worried
absolutely
for him.
so
Thank you.
what I got to tell you that the person who made the like I think about that moment of being instructed on that spotted towhee and their needs based on their natural history. Like I use that moment and it's so portable that I apply it to the writing of poetry. It's so portable that I can apply it to, you know, doing woodworking, of just like working with the way things actually are, and it
Yeah.
makes it just go better.
Mhm.
It's I it's a little bit under maybe okay, forget about the woodworking so much, but definitely the poetry and every other animal in care. Every other animal I've ever cared for has benefited from the day that Lori said that to me.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was someday in 1999.
Mhm. I I completely appreciate that moment. And I think it's also, yes, it's about paying attention to the way things are, the way they go, the way they're supposed to be, what their world is like. And you can apply that, like you said, to your poetry. I think it's applicable to woodworking. It's applicable to my relationship with my horse. It's paying attention. It's having learning the art of feel, and that's not necessarily feel with your hands. It's feel through your eyes. It's the power of observation. It's listening and not necessarily listening with your ears. So, and that's a really important skill for wildlife rehabilitators. It's there's certainly the medical side, the technician side of our work that is essential and necessary. That's medical care is half of what we do, but husbandry is the other half of what we do. In fact, I'd argue to say husbandry is probably more than half of what we
Mhm.
do. And you need that skill to do it well, to really to give care to those animals.
How would you, if you were training somebody, say that you, let's just say the opportunity comes up to train somebody, and how,
Every May.
how would you, um, how would you go about teaching somebody the value of that skill and how to develop it in themselves?
Well, I think one of the things that we just looking at the process that we have here, as much as I would like it to be very individual, take individuals under my wing individually and bring them along through the unique experiences that they're going to have here, we have to make it a little more standardized. But I think one of the places where I really like them to start is one, they may only be exposed to a couple of species initially. And I want to talk about the natural history. I want to make sure that opportunity has been created, or outside of here, they're finding opportunity to see what those birds do for a living out in the wild. I feel strongly that that is where it begins. If you don't know what these amazing beings do in their daily lives out there and what they do out in the world throughout a calendar year, thinking about all of our migratory birds,
Mhm.
um, it's going to be challenging to support their needs while they're in your care in a wildlife hospital. So natural history is where it begins for me. But also, observation skills are really important. So, once we have an understanding of what the natural history of this bird is, and most of our new volunteers and our interns come on board when the baby bird season begins. And so I always think that we're really privileged to be able to be part of their lives. Oh my goodness, here they
Mhm.
come in, this tiny little unrecognizable blob of flesh. And then when they leave our doors, they're this magnificent beauty of, feathered perfection. Um, that's remarkable in and of itself. But through this process, you also witness their natural history unfolding before your eyes. And there's things they're going to need so that they can continue that development as close to their natural process as possible. So being able to get out, observe in the wild, but then also take your observations there and apply them in the wildlife hospital is critical. So we talk about things like, your experience with the towhee and what it's doing in its space, how it's interacting with its environment, what purpose does that hop scratch method um, support in its natural history? What can we use here to support that behavior and ensure that they're yielding the rewards of hopping and scratching? Are they going to reveal some worms? Are they going to reveal some seeds? Just things like that. And I think the other component of observation is also being able to discern what's normal, what's not.
Mhm.
So, if we have a young swallow that's progressing along, and we've been out into the wetlands and we've seen the young swallows in their creches, and we've seen them take off as a group and fly together and start hunting. We've seen them express vocalizations among each other, alarm calls, and we have an individual in care who isn't demonstrating some of those behaviors, which we know are natural for that stage, for that species. That's an important observation to make. It's important to have that knowledge to make that assessment that, hey, we have this group of 25 cliff swallows, and we have this one dude who sits in the corner all the time, and he's kind of quiet, but he eats and does stuff, but he's not really interacting with the group. There might be a problem there,
Mhm.
knowing how, highly social and gregarious they are as a group, pretty much at any age, actually.
Right. So then you're like an early detection system, and you can get ahead of it perhaps before it turns
Exactly.
into a big disaster. Next thing you know, you've got a guy with like, some, ailment that is a secondary result of whatever had gone wrong at first.
That's right. And I think that those with and it's probably true with many different species of wildlife, but with songbirds, I always feel that it's a very short window of time that you have to identify some behavior, something that is giving just the most subtle indication that there's something not quite right. And if it's something not quite right medically, you have a you have an allotted amount of time to respond and fix
Mm.
that issue. And if it's not identified, then, a few days later, we could have a bird who we may not be able to turn around.
Yes.
Um, I think it's a manageable skill to obtain for someone who's new to this work, with just taking on a couple of species at a time. And so our internships are 8 weeks, and they get a heavy, heavy dose of swallows in that
Hmm.
8 weeks. So my hope is by the end of that 8 weeks that we would have an intern who would be able to walk into an aviary of 25 fledgling cliff swallows and be able to pick out an individual or two among that group who may not be thriving, or there's something about their behavior that raises a question, that
Hmm.
they're able to be observant enough and pay attention enough to understand what that is. Because the other thing is we're dealing with prey species, and sometimes their signals aren't overt, so you really have to be a good listener, good
Hmm.
observer. And it's hard, I've noticed, for people to shift gears among multiple species um, in the context of baby bird season, and be able to make informed assessments about that. Because even as youngsters, their behaviors are unique to species. So a Bewick's wren who's not thriving, or a Bewick's wren who's progressing along and demonstrating, impeccable self-feeding skills, their behaviors are going to be very, very different from a black phoebe, for
Hmm.
example. So I think those are sort of the essentials for when someone who is new starts out with us. Is I really want them to walk away with a good understanding of the natural history of the species that they're going to be responsible for while they're with us. And I really want them to learn how to pay attention. Like, don't get all caught up in learning how to splint a wing, or assess a molt,
Hmm.
age a bird by its molt, which a lot of students, that's what they want to come learn. And that's good, that's important. But to, I think, really have a foundation in this work, in the work we do here with the songbirds, those are two essential skills: is understanding the natural history and knowing how to observe and pay attention.
I would agree that in all wildlife rehab, those are definitely uh, they're they're the things that you have to stand on. You don't really have anything else. You have natural history, and you have what you can deduce. And it's not enough. I mean, when we're treating a species like brown pelican, we have to take the natural history, and then we have to run it through an aviator, because we are not going to create anything close to what a brown pelican, and if it's a juvenile, a brown pelican has to be able to grow up and, you know, uh, then go adapt to. And we don't have a way to recreate. You can give a brown creeper, something that resembles a tree bark,
Mhm.
And that's not enough, but we're not even coming close to the North Pacific Ocean that you have to get your food that's 75 feet below you right now.
Right.
So, it's a little bit like it's it's a little bit like translating, Czechoslovakian poets into, French, and you're somebody from Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah.
You're like, okay, we have to take that, which is completely foreign to me, and turn it into this, which is also completely foreign to me, but hope that it approximates that in a way that works inside that pelican's mind.
Right. And still have the same meaning.
Yes. And
Yeah.
but I do think it's possible. I mean, we do get good at assessing flight in an aviary,
Yes.
right? And there's no swallow that can do what a swallow does in an aviary.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, they're the aerialists of the world. I mean, they are,
Yeah.
right? They are. I mean, is there anybody that's better?
Nope. Nope, there isn't.
Nope. Solve that one.
I've seen a lot of them around the world, and I can tell you there is nothing better. Okay,
I'm
we can just
convinced of it.
wrap that up right here.
Yeah. So
No,
yeah, we'll link
no,
to
but I
the
mean your point about that to my best bird in the world page. I'm gonna do a link to that.
yeah. We can do that. The best bird. Well, I mean, we don't. If there's people out there still debating it, they're just duplicating effort.
Yeah, well, they're wasting time. They could be working on other
Yeah,
problem solving
because this one is
issues.
solved for sure.
Yes.
Um, well, I think that one of the things that really wanted to touch base with you today about is how do how how do you sustain a commitment to excellence over time?
Hmm.
I mean, I think you do. So it's not, so like, but is that something that you feel like you have to think about, or is just you're just driven by it so much that you don't even have to ponder it?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. Because if I didn't question it constantly, then I might forget to hold myself accountable to maintaining it. Um, I think what motivates me the most to do things the way I do them here is these incredible birds. I think back when I first started birding with my birding mentor, Rich Stallcup, and I had been birding with our local Audubon chapter before I met Rich. And I had been, I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I remember my grandmother taking the binoculars off the kitchen table and saying, "Oh, look at the oriole, look at the hummingbird outside on her back
Mhm.
porch at the feeders." So I'd always been very aware of birds and observing them in the wild, but I didn't really know a lot about what they were doing out there until I got involved with Audubon. And then I really didn't kind of become immersed in their role in the natural world and how just incredibly complex the life of a songbird of any species is. And I mean, you could say the incredible complex life of any wild animal. They have lives just like us, right? That they're living
Mhm.
out there doing their own thing, and challenges that they face, and problems that they overcome, and joys and victories that they savor. They're not unlike us, except they're way more special. So when I birded with Rich, he just really opened my eyes to their magic. They're incredible. We should revere them. So get a little teary. But I think I think about the privilege of working with them, and there is like once they leave my doors and go back to that life that they need to live, I need to be certain that I did everything within my power to do the very best for them, to make their time here as bearable as possible, right?
Hmm.
To tend to everything that I can bring to them to bring them comfort, and also to keep them safe and to treat their wounds and injuries and illness and et cetera to the best of my ability, my knowledge base. And if I don't have it, I reach out to my vet to help me. But that I don't want to be the one who takes their second chance away.
Mm.
So that's probably what keeps me accountable for my work, and helps me always question, am I doing the very best for this bird? So the other thing that helps me in kind of a weird way, but I think that being aware of the challenges that other rehabilitators face, and when someone comes to me with something that they're struggling with, a species they're struggling with, or husbandry issue that they're struggling with, or maybe they don't have the decision making power within the facility they volunteer or work with to improve some aspect of care. Uh, and I see the results of whatever this issue is those birds are struggling with at that facility. I look at what we do and it reaffirms that we're on the right path here. We can always do better, and we try to do that. Um, but also helping others improve their standard of care helps us improve our standard of care, because
Hmm.
it causes me to stop and reflect and look at other areas in our work where we can improve, other parts of our process where we can improve. And I think it's sometimes it's an improvement that is, it's about efficiency, which is not a very glamorous aspect of our work, but honestly, it's necessary, because, even the silliest little thing like wanting to be able to quickly grab for some medical instrument, if it's not in its place, if it wasn't put away correctly, you know, you're slowing down my treatment plan here.
Exactly. This wouldn't apply to songbirds very much, but you know, I introduced to Humboldt Wildlife Care Center a particular way to fold large sheets so that
I love it.
every opening of it is a usable shape.
Yes.
Right? Because if you're working by
Yes.
yourself and you need to grab a sheet to handle a pelican or a hawk or whoever, and you have to refold the sheet because they folded it all long ways,
Yeah.
right? So, and explaining this to somebody who has no idea why I'm being this particular about a sheet does make me
Yeah.
look a little bit like a lunatic.
That is not something that you should put you on yourself. I don't think it makes you look like a lunatic at all, although I've shared those same thoughts going, I know they think this is absolutely ridiculous that we're having to review the proper folding of each style of towel,
Mhm.
but it's necessary. And then, so I'd like to know though, when you break that down for whoever you're teaching and explaining the form and functionality of that process, do you feel they get it? Or do you feel
Yeah.
like they have to be put in a position of frustration on their own when they go to reach for that sheet and it's not folded correctly to finally get it?
Well, as a former mime, I do act out the frustration for them when I'm doing the initial explanation. So I try to make it real. I try to make it vivid. Um,
Good.
I mean, I don't stomp up and down like I would do in real life, but you know, uh, yeah, I think that it's, I find that yeah, those are, there's always somebody, there's volunteers, or there's people who, you try, and and a challenge is to find them some, because they're just, maybe they don't retain things well or whatnot. um or or maybe they're never going to advance to a level where they're handling an animal that they would actually need the sheet to do that.
Yeah.
I'm uh In the past few years, speaking of this specifically to this sheet folding issue, is I did learn that grade school kids nowadays, like, since like that, they've now gotten old enough to come be volunteers at the clinic.
Hmm.
We're taught that it was hamburger versus hot dog in the folding of,
Oh,
and
that's interesting.
I, I thought it was interesting. I also thought it was like mildly insulting to insist to use that. I was like, I'm going to tell grown-ups to fold sheets hamburger style, not hot dog style. But and that seemed wrong. But but once I got over that and realized that, no, this is communicating,
Yeah.
and I need
Yeah.
to go with it. I don't
Yes.
like it, but I need to go with it.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to make some concessions to get to the end goal, as
Yeah,
long as it doesn't
exactly.
cost a life.
Hmm. I think one of the, oh darn it, I've lost my train of thought. Um, See if I get it back real quick. Probably not. Well, I think, we're looking at, oh, I remember what I was going to say. I think that, there's a lot of things that I find are, they're psychological gestures, almost specific, almost only they're psychological gestures. Like, there's a particular towel that a volunteer donated. She brought them in from Costco, and it was a big old stack of white washcloths that were square white washcloths, very utilitarian and uniform. And I was like, from now on, and we don't use, at our clinic, we do not use paper towels. Everything is, when you dry your hands, you use a a dish towel, and then it
Mhm.
goes in the laundry. And
Fantastic.
we wash tons of dish towels a day.
Oh,
Probably makes up a third of our laundry is dish towels from, usage. But and I was like, there will be no more mix and match dish towels in the exam room. From now on, we'll just use these white towels in the exam room.
yeah.
And the reason wasn't because that's the right towel to use. It was just because it helps me. It helps me feel like I'm on top of things. It's a gesture, right? That I've just like, no, we're making all nice and it's tidy in here.
Mhm.
When I look into the exam room from the hallway and I see the towels stacked on top of the exam room refrigerator, I'm
Yes.
like, okay,
Yes.
we've got that under control. And it's
Yep.
just like one little thing that I can put to bed. And it's just tidy. It's like washing the sink, you know. It's like a 2-minute vacation in my day that I give to myself, scrubbing out a stainless sink. And I find that those, and I try to train people to find those things for themselves.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
if it matters to them, introduce it to us, and we'll make it universal.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to support people in finding ways that help them um, feel confident about their ability to do excellent work,
Right. Yeah.
and so that
Excellent.
it matters. And to go back just a little ways to what we were talking about earlier with, like, listening. I It's a struggle to get a new person to, and I feel really grateful, by the way, that I was trained by such awesome people, like such as John Huckabee, vet up at
Mm.
Paws in Seattle, who did not ever discourage my uh, theorizing about why a patient would be acting a certain way.
Mhm.
He just led me into good information to support that theorizing.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? He didn't say, "Oh, you don't know. Would you just let the experts handle this?"
Uh,
So,
yeah.
like when we were working with the mountain lion, we did not say mountain lion in Washington. We did say cougar, but we're in
Ah,
California now. So we were working with this cougar bait, but like, my questions about like, oh, is this okay? Or should we be doing that? Or I'm worried about X, and
mhm.
so I was supported in my apprenticeship by really fantastic mentors. And I try to return the favor to new people. And it can be challenging because it is
Yeah, yeah,
it, the intuition side of where information comes from, which is not unsupported by observation,
right.
is like how to balance that. I some of the times I'm like, I will s- I will say something like, if you have set up an animal's housing
Mhm.
and you go in there, if it's big enough for you to go in there, like an aviary or
Yeah.
a place for raccoons or whomever, and you hate it, you have to take that information to heart.
Mhm.
And but it didn't come with an instruction manual. So now you have to apply a kind of a scientific rigor to discover what you hate about it.
Right.
Sometimes it comes with a flash. You're just like, you look in there, somebody's going to get killed by that.
Right.
And you just
Yeah.
know it. And it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. You have to change it, because if you've had that thought and then you don't fix it and then the tragedy happens, now you have that to live with the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that
Exactly.
that doesn't help you become a good caregiver. That
Mhm.
damages your ability, you
It
know?
doesn't. Your point about intuition is it's a valuable point, because I think sometimes if you have someone that you're teaching or even yourself and you're trying to just go by academics and instruction manuals and all this stuff, and you ignore these gut feelings that you have, these things that pop into your head like, that's not right, or I have a feeling about that, you're going to get into trouble,
Mhm,
because one of those bad feelings is going to come to light sooner or later. So I am a strong proponent of also relying on your intuition as well, because somewhere in there you have a basis that's guiding that thought or that feeling.
mhm. And it's probably not as like flaky or irrational as saying intuition makes it sound.
Mm,
It's solid information that's just the way you have access to it. It's not
yeah,
necessarily um I I well, I find that that's a very challenging thing to teach. Because to teach yourself to trust your intuition is a challenging thing to um in any field. I would imagine this is the case.
yeah, I agree. And I think, the thing about gut feelings and intuition is that is an informed thought that is in your brain. It's informed based on layers of experience, big and small. And maybe you may not be able to identify those crystallizing moments or moment that is bringing up that question for you, but they are informed and it's based on experience. And so, the idea of intuition and gut feelings isn't easy to teach, but teaching how to make informed decisions and offering experiences is. And so I think the student, when given the opportunity to have the freedom to go, I have a feeling about this, I have a thought about this, my impression of this, then that is development of their intuition
Mhm.
and their gut experience, their gut feeling about something.
So to circle back to the beginning of what we were discussing, Janine Perlman,
Mhm.
right? She had an intuition about
Yeah,
diet,
yeah,
and then she applied, I mean, a scientific method
that's
to
right.
developing her diet. And now
Yes,
it's a diet that 20 years down the road, as many, many people are using. I'm using it. I'm grateful to the work that she's put into that. I see that diet. I see her work in the vibrancy of our patients.
yes,
And I And then I have some, then there's people like her that also, there's nicely folded towels, there's properly folded sheets, and then there's the heroes
Yeah.
who also, like you think, well, there's somebody out there working to make a diet. The least I can do is adhere to the recipe
Mhm.
and note my results,
Yeah.
and boy, I tell you one thing, I do love the vitamin paste and oil. I do. I have
So
such a,
nice, isn't
I
it?
have a such a, it's. I mean, like I haven't done it. I've read the analysis, but I haven't done any of it. I'm just like I'm just taking what this person is saying and I'm applying it, and I'm just getting really, as was said back in the olden days, kick-ass results.
Yeah.
And and it's magnificent, and
It is magnificent. And yeah, I mean the results speak for themselves.
they quite do.
They're right there, living in the flesh and feather in front of you. There's not a lot you can argue with that.
I,
And I
you might
think
be a results-oriented person.
a little bit, a little bit.
I like a good result. A good
I
process
also
is fine, but if it doesn't lead to a
like
good
my
result,
folded towels too. Like the thing that you said about the dish towels, being like a moment of joy for you and making
Mhm.
you feel like things are in order, even though everything else may be in hell and chaos. I have that too. And I'm very attached to those things. And I am not shy about telling people, volunteers and interns, hey, it just makes me feel like we things have things under control here when there's not water and food smeared all over the clinic kitchen floor. It just
Yeah, it works for me.
I just it's just really important to me.
Well,
And I can't be the one to manage it because I'm busy.
I cheated because I arrived at that state by my, the preparatory work I did to become a rehabilitator, um, restaurant work, and the idea of you have a section, and if it looks like shit, that's because you did it,
Yep.
and you're the one that's going to be here an hour after everybody else cleaning,
Yeah.
and so you clean as you go, and just like
Yep.
staying on
Oh,
top
clean
of
as
a
you go. Oh yeah.
yeah, you just, it's an unfolding disaster, but it's not an unexpected, it's not an emergency. Summer is not an emergency. We know it's coming.
Yeah.
It's a disaster because we're overworked and underpaid.
Mhm.
And, I mean, obviously, if the need that wildlife rehabilitation addresses was being addressed at the level at the level that it's actually needed, there would be significantly more rehabilitators and they would all be much better funded.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I just heard that 460 billionaires spent $881 million on the midterm election. And all we managed to do with that midterm election was we didn't make the world a better place. All we managed to do is keep fascist thugs from taking over.
Yeah.
And it cost
And
us $881 million. Well, it cost them billionaires 880, but that's $881 million that could have gone to, I mean, we're getting ready to move our facility and the land we're buying is a bargain, $250,000
oh
for
my gosh.
over an acre in California
Oh
with a building that already has plumbing and electricity. So
my
the deal is fantastic, right? But $250,000 is
yeah. Yeah.
a lot of money to an organization such as ours.
Mhm.
So the 881 million sort of stuck in my mind yesterday when I read that. I was like,
Yeah,
you
I can see why.
creeps. I need $250,000. And you had 881 million of them and you bought political ads with it.
And you still have billions.
And you still have billions.
Yeah. Something isn't right there.
Something is definitely not right there. So
Yeah.
that's a sort of great place to segue into this other thing, because one of the things that you do differently than most other wildlife rehabilitation organizations or rehabilitators is you engage in real honest advocacy. Um,
Yeah. I'm compelled to do it.
so, I mean, I feel like I know what compels you, but what compels you?
And you as well, Monty.
Yeah, I've had ups and downs with it, and if you want to know about that, I'd be happy to tell you. But what
Yeah.
I feel like I know what compels you, but what does compel you?
Well, I mean, it's just as simple as my love for these birds.
Hmm. I tried.
And if you want to go like one layer deeper, it's also the lack of love that others appear to have for these birds. Um, and we see this every day in our hospitals, right? Just these
Yes.
horrible, horrible things that happen to these individuals that we see. And then we multiply that by the tens of thousands. And
Hmm.
we know these things are happening to their brethren, their kind, the world over. So I can't help but speak on their behalf because no one's listening to them, obviously. I
Hmm.
mean, with their populations of so many species of songbirds are hanging on by a thread around the globe, and no one's doing anything, is what it feels like to me constantly. So I feel like that's my responsibility because I have this incredible gift of being able to take care of the individuals who need the help. So it's like yeah, I mean, it's just I can't imagine not doing it.
Right.
I guess that's what you feel like when you're compelled to do something.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. I think so. Yeah.
like, I
Oh,
can't
right.
imagine
Compulsion.
sitting by quietly after thousands of birds have been in my care, slaughtered by free roaming cats, and not say something about that. Like, who the hell
Yes.
do where do I get off being silent about something like that? I
Yeah,
don't.
exactly. That's
I don't enjoy that privilege of being silent.
mm-mm. Yeah, I
Not
don't.
allowed to.
I thought that I liked the idea of advocacy. Like, so many of my heroes are powerful advocates. It's like social movements and civil rights heroes and I always thought that I was like, oh, well, I mean, you're growing up and you're like, I want to be just like Martin Luther King when I grow up, right? And like that's the model. And then it turns out though that Martin Luther King wasn't just a really, really good thinker and speaker. He was brave. And like he's brave because he gets shot, right? Um, but the bravery required, so this is what I'm getting at, is like do you feel like there's a cost? Have you
Yeah.
to your like you have to manage like the loss of support from certain segments of the population if you start speaking too loudly, getting out of your lane, they might think. Like, you just stay there and take care of those songbirds, lady, and don't you go messing around in the politics around here.
Yeah, I mean, you know as I do that it's sure being brave, being courageous, shooting your mouth off before you really think it through. Okay, that's my middle name. Um, in many contexts of my life, but it's it's painful. It's always painful. It's you feel unheard most of the time.
Hmm.
You're constantly thinking of other ways to say things so you can be heard. Like, well, that message didn't work. Let me try and reword it and deliver it in a different way. Um, and yeah, and feeling like you're putting things in jeopardy by saying something. That whole Caltrans experience was
Hmm.
where we fought for the cliff swallows in Petaluma was horrible. Is probably right up there with one of the worst experiences in my life, but also one of the best. because I learned a whole lot about, how to navigate the system.
Hmm.
And I learned a whole lot about making a negative impression to, uh, part of the public and the power wielding entities. But I also learned that there's a lot of uh, strength to draw from your community and your colleagues. And I also learned that, not everybody's going to agree with you,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
On a lot of things. Like, I love peanut butter, but there's a million other people who hate it.
Uh-huh.
So, and that's okay. Just because they don't agree with you doesn't mean that you stop talking about what needs to be talked about. Because at somewhere along the line, you know, justice will be served, transformation will happen, people will evolve, they will come to recognize that they can change their behaviors. They will come to a point where they want to change their behavior. I mean, we do have people in our little community of Sebastopol who have gone on to build catios for their free roaming cats. Every catio in this town is a victory in my mind.
Yeah, yeah.
it's it was worth that day 10 years ago where I made someone cry.
Uh-huh.
you know you know and I don't feel bad about it anymore. So
Hmm.
but it is hard. You pay a personal price, I think. I'll be perfectly honest, there are days during the summer when I feel completely beaten down and like I don't think I'm going to be able to accept the care of another little fledgling who's been slaughtered and robbed of its chance at life because someone was too lazy to make the decision to safely contain their cat.
Hmm.
And I just think I can't have the conversation with this person today because I just don't have the fortitude to do it. I definitely have those days where I make an active choice not to say anything. But we do follow it up with a letter and a brochure on safely containing your cats. So, I'll make my point somehow, and I'll give them that necessary information, and I'll speak on behalf of that slaughtered little mockingbird. But it may not be in that moment because I'm not going to be effective, or uh, I just need to take a moment of self care
Hmm.
and divert my energy toward saving the ones that I can. But advocacy is hard work, and I think you and I probably had similar or shared experiences when we started to work on the advocacy committee together for CCWR. That it's hard to get an idea, a mission, a topic um, that you want to champion. It's hard to get it off the ground. It's hard to formulate an effective plan around it. It's challenging to get your message heard in the way you want it heard, and in the way you feel it's going to have the most power to affect change, to be the most effective. Um, but, you know, you didn't stop trying. I didn't stop trying. We're still independently and collectively doing our work as advocates for those animals who we love,
Hmm.
right? So you just sometimes you have to take a day off.
Yeah, and I
You just
think
keep doing
there
it.
there's rewards that you don't know are coming
Yeah,
that do come,
yeah,
the respect from colleagues that you didn't know you were earning. That isn't just like a feather in your cap, but it actually makes your work easier, because next thing you know, there's an organization that's reaching out to you about how they can support your work better. And you're like, I didn't know that was coming.
yeah.
I didn't ask for it, but yet here it is, and you do get to use it. And you mentioned, how you take care of yourself, and I think that that's really I see that I've had you on this for over an hour now, so I want to respect your time and whatnot. But I do want to bring in one other topic, which is you know, we get called all kinds of things. When I moved to California, it was the first I ever heard this term, but I heard it nonstop for like the entire time I've been here, which is wildlife rehabilitators are a bunch of bunny huggers, right? And I was like, bunny huggers? You
How could
can't
that
catch
be
a
a bad
bunny.
thing?
You can't hug a bunny. But you know, one of the things that, like when I'm doing volunteer interviews, bringing people on board and stuff like that, is I warn them that this work exposes you to traumatic situations.
Mhm.
You're going to see more wet ends of a humerus that you should never have seen
Yeah.
than you ever were gonna. That's, you know, you are 100% putting yourself in the path of sorrow,
Yeah.
and and not just sorrow, but also like distress.
Hmm.
And uh what is why the people, when I'm when it's time for, like, you know, serious staff acknowledgments, one of the things that is always right at the front of my mind to acknowledge staff for is their bravery in putting themselves in a position where they're going to feel bad about an outcome.
Yeah.
Like, you are totally exposing yourself to risk to, for the rest of your life, feeling like you killed that bird, and you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
You're going to hate that every time you have that moment where you remember that bird. You are going to hate that. You're just going to, and there's no getting over it. You can say, oh, I've processed it and I've remembered that all these birds, these are their second chance. This is the, you know, and there's a lot of things that we've been told by our mentors coming up that were meant to ease that moment, you know, like, you did your best. Every bird is, this is their second chance. In nature's eyes, they were dead already, you know, and they, people say stuff, and that helps. And it helps when somebody who you really admire says, hey, you know, I once trached a loon. And then you're like, oh, that must have super sucked.
Yeah.
And yet here you are working with diligence and confidence.
Yeah.
So obviously you can recover from that. So I really appreciate staff's willingness to expose themselves to this. And it's not like a theoretical exposure. You're gonna do it. You're gonna get
Yeah.
hit. It's like there's
Yeah.
two
You
kinds of
will.
motorcyclists, right? Those that have fallen and those that are gonna.
Right. Right.
And that's you don't have a choice on this.
Mm-mm.
So
No.
how do you have an a something to, like, what do you do to to make sure that you are not just drowning it in vodka?
Well, I don't like vodka for one.
Boom.
So, whew, thank goodness that's off the list. I don't know, Monty. I struggle with it every year, and I think what I'm leaning toward now is I just accept that it's a part of my body. The grief, the fatigue, the burden of guilt. It's just here. You just carry it with you, and it seeps out when it can. And
Mhm.
I think probably what I have, because I really struggled with it bad.
Mhm.
But probably the last 5 years, I feel like I'm getting a handle on it. So there's ritual has a lot to do with how I manage it, process it, make peace with it. So end of season rolls around. I kind of sign off from life for the month of October. Don't try to schedule things with me.
Mhm.
don't don't ask me to commit with something because I'll probably cancel on you at the last minute because I want to say yes, but I can't. I just
Mhm.
mentally, physically can't do it. So I've learned to take October off. I mean, I'm still here quietly doing my work with the birds, but the volunteers aren't here, the interns aren't here. I have no schedules, no commitments other than to just make sure everyone in our care is getting the care they need. And then I do a lot of wandering around in my garden. I
Mhm.
do a lot of planting of plants. Um, the carcasses, the ones who didn't make it, they find a home under a plant in the garden. So, there's I think it's symbolic in a way, right? We're
Hmm.
returning them to the earth. They're bringing new life to this plant. They're going on. They're giving gifts to the rest of the natural world as those flowers bloom, those berries on the elderberry ripen, and so on. So
That's
that
beautiful.
cycle is part of my ritual. Then I think that talking about it uh, to anyone who wants to listen, who's not going to deem me crazy and unfit to drive or whatever, is also really helpful. But I think just overall acceptance and acknowledgement that we in our work we carry that burden. It's part of us, and to not name it and recognize it can be very detrimental, but also to find a way to manage it in the moment, I guess. So boundary setting in our work
Mm.
is very important. This spring, I had to set a boundary that I had been thinking about for a couple of years, receiving transfers from another facility who has a very low standard of care. And the birds we were getting were, well, it was devastating to receive them, to be
Hmm.
perfectly honest with you. And so this was the year that I said we could not accept transfers.
Oh.
And part of that was I just didn't feel they needed to take responsibility. They needed to hear my words and step it up and do what was needed to do, not for me, but for those animals in their care. But there
Hmm.
was also a very strong component of that I was making that decision as well for my own mental well-being. You just like that's bringing on unnecessary grief
Uh-huh.
is what it was starting to become. But that I think is, variations of all those feelings are something that each of us experiences, and maybe some are masters at compartmentalizing it. I'm very good at stuffing it all down because the most important thing is the matter at hand in baby
Hmm.
bird season anyway, which is
Sure.
getting these animals the care they require and deserve.
Yeah,
But
you can cry later.
you cry later. Plenty of time to cry later. Believe me, there's lots of crying going on in October. Tons
Hmm.
of it. At really inopportune times. You can see it still seeps out even just in general conversation that's unrelated.
Hmm.
But those are just emotions and energy that needs to come out and dissipate. Uh, but you know, everyone has their techniques. But I think like just thinking about people who are just coming into this work and the things that you want to share with your interns and your new volunteers, making it clear, you're all going to see the wet end of a humorous and many of them. Um, it's important to have those open discussions about it. We don't want people to be blindsided by it when they start
Mm.
feeling it, but we also want to reassure them that, it's very normal. And
Hmm.
if you're not experiencing, I'm wondering, are you really present in your work? I mean, part of what we are, what makes us able to do what we do so well is our empathy for others. But, with that comes empathy for yourself.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the cry later thing is definitely I don't see a way around it
Yeah.
particularly, but I do see that that has its costs,
Yeah.
because you're borrowing future time from yourself.
Sure.
that you're like, okay, this at 3:15 a.m. I am going to be very unhappy, and that's fine. I accept it. It's coming. I am already committing to future sorrow, but right
Mhm.
now I just got to get this done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because your first priority is taking care of that individual or whatever, the 500 you have in care.
When it
That's your first
comes
priority.
I mean, we make these decisions on physical matters too. Every time and I'm not actually good at making this decision, and I, I reject it most of the time as a decision that's worth making when you do not clean as you go, because now you're definitely screwing yourself in the future. You're telling your future self, you matter not as much to me as me now matters to me. And I don't endorse that. It's a mean thing to do to yourself and also to others, you know. So like I'm kind of a like, no, the laundry doesn't get backed up. It may have a lot to go because we only have so many machines, but it's
Yes.
always moving forward. There's no, oh, we just let that go.
Right. Right.
Right. And that's um but I think that we do sometimes let it go, right? We do sometimes things slip behind and we're like, I guess I'll be up until, midnight cleaning that mess,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's not what I wanted to do tonight,
Mhm.
but it is what I'm going to do tonight. So we make those decisions and we spend that money, so to speak.
Mhm.
That I like to think that that there's a way to approach it so that we can spend that money, so to speak,
Mhm.
um responsibly,
Yeah.
so that we're making the choice, that we know what choice we're making, and we know how we're doing it, and we largely aren't falling deeper into debt every day,
Mhm.
and that we have a way of recompensing you know what we
Yeah.
spend in that manner.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what that is. I mean, it's going for walks, it's looking at the ocean, it's reading, it's
Right.
um I mean, one year for me, for Veronica, it was watching Jessica Jones 3 seasons on Netflix, because and I ended up developing a talk out of that,
Oh, really?
because
Oh,
I thought she was basically, and I do recommend this, by the way,
okay.
if it's still available, because while it was all detective and superhero stuff, she did seem very much like a wildlife rehabilitator. Like, just
All right.
like
I'm
her,
intrigued.
her modus operandi matched how I felt internally. I was like
Mhm.
she's her metaphor is from my heart. And
Ah.
so I got a lot of use out of that. It then made me think it was a superhero thing, and I watched a bunch of very stupid superhero stuff that was not that at all. Before I realized, no, it was just the way that show was written. So you don't have to go off on a superhero binge.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh, um, well, this has been fantastic, and it was everything I hoped it would be.
Oh,
Um,
likewise.
I'm super glad that we got a chance to talk. Uh, I'm definitely going to do more of these. I really want to get more of these out so that people can see like who the heroes and the stars and the innovators and the standard bearers for excellence in our work is. And I appreciate you so much, Veronica. I don't know if you really know how much that is the case, but I just like when I'm doing songbird care, I'm like, don't this up so that you feel like you got to send your songbirds to Veronica. Learn from Veronica and do it as good as she does. That's the way I would honor you.
Oh, thank you, Monty.
Um,
I don't want you, I hope I'm not instilling fear in people.
well,
I
I
just
think
want,
a little bit of fear is not a bad thing.
well, okay. This is true, actually, speaking from my own personal fear experiences. But yeah, it's always my hope that people are inspired to do better for these little guys. They
I
deserve
remember
it.
you telling people in one of your talks, you said, yeah, it's more expensive about feeding insects. Yeah, it's more expensive, but you have an obligation to do it anyway. And I was like, man, she cut to the chase. Yeah, it's harder to do it right. Duh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just it. It's and there's also, I mean, this is a whole other podcast, but there is, where songbird care is concerned in our field of work, there's an imbalance there. And there are a lot of programs within organizations that receive a whole lot of support that should otherwise be applied toward our mission, which is to rehabilitate wildlife
Uh-huh.
and get them back out into the wild. And too often I see the songbirds are the underserved population of wildlife hospitals because resources are diverted elsewhere to
Hmm.
maybe animals that aren't being rehabilitated and put back out in the wild, or
Yes.
a culture has been created within an organization where other contingents of the wildlife population are deemed more important. Um, and none of that sits well with me.
Yeah.
So
Ditto.
you'll never be able to shut me up about that topic.
Well,
But
and I'm glad about that. And that is actually, I'm been developing an idea for a roundtable discussion. I want to get for those of you who are just tuning in and you just got here from Mars. January and Marie are two other awesome rehabilitators that
yes.
are also Bird LAX co-founders, January Bill and Marie Travers. And if you know about them, it's probably because of their awesome work that they've done independently, largely, but by themselves out in the Lower Klamath Refuge and botulism response to, like, in
Mhm.
2020 they responded. I believe they treated about 3,000 patients over the course of that summer from a botulism outbreak there. So, but anyway, January Marie have done a lot of legwork on the uh, physiological and psychic problems that happen to patients or to animals who are held in permanent captivity, wild animals in permanent captivity. So definitely going to want to cover that in the future, Veronica, and I would be very happy to have you part of that discussion.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, right on. Um, I guess if you'd have any parting words you'd like to say, this is a good time.
Well, I mean, I just related to the many things that we've touched on today. I think that it's just, let me just say this. Speaking to my hero, you, I think it's, you set such a beautiful example to all of us, your colleagues, but also to the people who I know you are mentoring, the people who look to you as a mentor within your work, that your ethics, holding yourself accountable, when you know better, do better. Those are all really important things for each of us to hold close when we have the gift of being able to work with these incredible, incredible beings. So I would say for anyone who is listening and who has the opportunity to work with wildlife in the way we do, or who is out there serving in an advocacy role for our wildlife, to keep your ethics in check, um, to be their voice, take that seriously. It sounds kind of cliche,
Hmm.
but to know that they don't, and they have plenty of voices, but to be a translator, I guess, for them, to help them better, to be better heard by the human ears.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Dee.
But I think our ethics also guide that. They guide our work in whatever that capacity is, whether it's advocacy or it's wildlife rehabilitation. If we go about having strong ethics in our work, we really can do our work well. We can do our best for our patients.
Mhm. And it maybe helps a little bit with how we are able to deal with the the trauma,
Yeah.
because we can lean back on, because ethics is a group effort. I mean, obviously personal integrity is your own business, but when you're talking about working, I mean, the work we do is collaborative,
Hmm.
and each of us holding ourselves to a standard and being a not a measuring stick, but I feel it's very critical for us to be uh, to support people in expressing their own integrity. That's You can't shame people into that posture. It can only be inspired,
Yeah.
and that's something that comes back to inspire you, right? When you're like, I need this person to be inspired, and it's eh, it's difficult times. It's difficult to train.
Yeah, it
And there's
is.
people who are gifted. There's people, they come along and you're like, oh my God, I'm keeping you forever. Because you because you're bringing out the best in yourself, but you're also bringing out the best in me and the clinic when you're here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I know those people that you're talking about. It's pretty remarkable. And it also, I don't know, it's when they come along, you feel like, I have a little, I have a little moment to breathe now.
Hmm.
This is good. I almost
Yeah,
feel
because
a
it's like,
little
oh,
lazy in
two
a
of us
way.
are pulling. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it is
Well,
nice.
yeah. Well, I'm so thrilled we had a chance to talk, and I guess
Me too.
looking forward to getting this edited and up there. I think a lot of people are going to really benefit from hearing you in a discursive fashion.
Oh,
But
well,
thanks for being here.
thanks for having me, Monty.
All right. We'll check you out later. And ladies and gentlemen of the wild there out in podcast landia, this has been New Wild Review, and you were listening to Veronica Bowers of Native Songbird Care and Conservation. And when you see this podcast, there will be links abounding to get you to a lot of the different topics that we talked about today. Some informational stuff about Caltrans and Petaluma, maybe, and to Veronica's organization. And thanks for being here, and thanks for being part of our gang. And I'll talk to you I'll see you in the funny papers, Veronica. Okay.